Ever walk out of a movie feeling like your brain just exploded? Yeah, that's Tenet for you. It's a mind-bending masterpiece of time travel, inverted bullets, and backwards explosions. But what did it all mean? The ending left audiences scratching their heads harder than a cat in a catnip factory. Did you spend the entire movie squinting in confusion? Fret no more. In this video, we're here to break down the cryptic conclusion of Tenet piece by piece. We'll explore the mind-bending twist, analyze the character's true motives, and finally make sense of the seemingly nonsensical. So click that red subscribe button first and stay with me until the end of the video. Before starting with this, let me caution you about the spoilers first. We may have disclosed some crucial twists in the movie, so be careful if you haven't watched the movie yet. Now, Tenet is a 2020 science fiction action thriller written and directed by Christopher Nolan, who co-produced it with his wife, Emma Thomas. The movie, a collaboration between the United Kingdom and the United States, features a star-studded cast including John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Elizabeth Debicki, Dimple Kapadia, Michael Caine, and Kenneth Branagh. The story revolves around a former CIA agent who gets recruited into a clandestine organization. His mission was to uncover the origins of objects moving backward through time and their link to an impending future attack on the present. Nolan partnered again with Warner Bros. And his production company Syncope for the film's production and distribution. Now, coming to the point, the end of Tenet raises many questions that people will still have long after the movie. First off, how did the protagonist and Neil cross paths? And what about the big question? Can time really be messed with, or are we stuck in a loop? But what about those future humans? What are they up to? And those silver capsules, what's their deal? And finally, does this ending leave the door open for a Tenet 2? So many questions, so much to ponder. In Christopher Nolan's 11th feature film Tenet, we see a departure from his previous works like Inception. Instead, it feels like a culmination of his filmmaking journey over the past decade. The movie starts setting up a spy story, but then it takes a sharp turn into the mind-bending world of time inversion. What's interesting is how Nolan doesn't hold the audience's hand through the complexity of the plot. He trusts that viewers will catch on, even if they don't immediately grasp every detail. This approach adds to the disorientation of the film's message, keeping us on our toes and making us think long after the credits roll. But why is Tenet called the protagonist in the whole film? This name choice is deliberate and carries symbolic weight within the film's narrative. While it may seem like a generic term for someone involved in espionage or covert operations, it hints at a deeper meaning. The protagonist is usually the main figure in a story, and the plot revolves around them. They're usually the ones who make the story happen, and what they do affects how the story ends. By calling the main character the protagonist, Christopher Nolan is recognizing that he's the most important person in the story, and also giving us a hint about what that means. The protagonist is even more mysterious because he doesn't have a name. It makes the point even stronger that he's not just a figure but a symbol of a bigger idea or concept. In this case, he represents the idea of someone planning things from behind the scenes, moving the story forward through time and backward through time. Now, who's the protagonist working for in Tenet? It's basically a case of everyone working for him. Yep, that's right, the protagonist is like the puppet master pulling all the strings. From the covert operations in Kiev to assembling an entire army that messes with time, it's all part of the protagonist's grand plan. Even that shady organization led by Martin Donovan's character is just another piece of his puzzle. They're all in on it, helping the protagonist ensure that this mysterious algorithm thing stays hidden in the past. Now, you might be wondering how Sator, the main baddie, seems to know everything, even the secret code words. Well, here's the twist. He's probably in cahoots with the future folks, too. It's like a high-stakes game of chess, with the protagonist making the moves and Sator trying to outsmart him every step of the way. So when you see the protagonist and his crew in action, just remember, they're running the show, and everyone else is just along for the ride. It's all part of Nolan's mind-bending plot, keeping you guessing until the very end. Now let's talk about that epic gunfight scene at the Opera House in Tenet, and the burning question: who fired the first inverted bullet and saved the protagonist's bacon? Well, it turns out the hero of the hour is none other than Neil, played by Robert Pattinson. Yeah, he's the guy who swoops in just in the nick of time, right when the protagonist is about to catch a bullet from one of the Ukrainian special forces. But Neil's involvement goes way deeper than it seems. See, the protagonist thought he had hired Neil in Mumbai, but it turns out Neil had already been part of the plot long before that. He was working behind the scenes, pulling strings like a master puppeteer. So when the chaos erupts in the opera house, Neil is there, ready to save the day and keep the protagonist safe. It's all part of Nolan's intricate storytelling, weaving layers of mystery and suspense into every scene. And trust me, it's moments like these that make Tenet the mind-bending masterpiece it is. And what's the mystery of those silver capsules? When things take a turn for the worse during the key of operation, the protagonist finds himself in a tight spot. He's offered a cyanide pill by his comrade as a way out, but guess what? It's a fake. Yeah, it's just a test to see if he's truly committed to the cause and his team. And man, does he pass the test with flying colors by choosing to face the music rather than spill the beans. While the protagonist pill is a dud, it seems that there are real versions out there. Take Sater, for example. He's got his own silver cyanide pill, and he's pretty confident it's the real deal. But hold on a second, was he duped into thinking it was legit by Tenet? Or maybe he had some shady connections of his own that gave him access to the real deal. It's all a bit murky. Now let's get into the intriguing backstory of how the protagonist and Neil really crossed paths. The movie's ending spills the beans that Neil had actually been in cahoots with Tenet even before he first met the protagonist. Sneaky, right? But there were subtle hints dropped along the way that something fishy was going on. Remember when they first meet in that swanky Mumbai hotel bar? Neil effortlessly orders the protagonist's favorite drink, dropping hints that he's got some insider knowledge. In a mind-bending twist, it turns out that the protagonist was actually the one who roped Neil into this whole mess in the first place. And get this, it seems like they've had some wild adventures together, all in the name of safeguarding the algorithm's journey through time. Now, here's where things get really trippy. Neil hints that their friendship goes way back, suggesting that the protagonist recruited him in the past. It's like a paradox wrapped in an enigma. So to sum it up, the connection between the protagonist and Neil runs deep, and their partnership is key to unraveling the mind-boggling mysteries of Tenet. Now, what about that reverse gunshot wound? Well, first off, when it comes to inversion, things get seriously topsy-turvy. In the case of explosions, like the protagonist's car blowing up, inversion leads to a bizarre reversal of heat transfer, effectively freezing him. It's like hitting the pause button on a fiery disaster, keeping him chilly but intact. But when it comes to reverse gunshot wounds, things take a darker turn. Sater's bullet brings more than just pain. It packs a deadly dose of radiation poisoning. Without some serious intervention, Kat would have been toast. Our heroes, the protagonists, Neil and Ives, pull off a daring move by inverting themselves and Kat to reverse the radiation and save her life. It's a wild ride, but it works. Kat's inverted cells kick into gear, reversing the radiation damage and giving her a fighting chance. The healing process doesn't just patch up Kat's wounds, it hints at something even more extraordinary. See, reversing the entropy of cells doesn't just heal injuries, it could potentially reverse aging itself. Imagine the possibilities. With constant switching between inversion and normal time flow, someone could be practically immortal. It's like a fountain of youth on steroids. Despite the miraculous healing, Kat's left with a scar that seems out of place in the world of inversion. By revealing herself as the older Kat, scar and all, she delivers the ultimate mic drop moment before taking down the villain. Now, let's talk about Tenet's final battle. To understand this, we have the idea of the temporal pincer approach, a strategy that completely changes the game when it comes to conventional warfare. Imagine two groups, one of which knows exactly what's going to happen and is charging headfirst into battle, and the other is working backward through time. As the battle starts, Neil's team rewinds the clock, scouting out the enemy's moves in reverse. Meanwhile, Ives and the protagonist charge ahead, armed with invaluable insights from their time-traveling comrades. It's a strategic dance across the sands of time. But just when you start to think you've got a handle on things, Tenet throws a curveball. The entire saga from start to finish turns out to be part of a grand cosmic chess game, a mind-bending revelation that'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about time. So in Tenet, it seems the characters are trying to change the future, right? They're on this big mission to stop something bad from happening. It's kinda like when you try to fix something before it goes wrong, like in those superhero movies. But then, things start to get confusing. There's this warning about a coming temporal war. Is it real, or is it just someone trying to scare them into joining the mission? And then there's Neil, who knows he'll die, but he's totally fine with it. He thinks it's supposed to happen no matter what they do. So this makes us wonder, Can time really be changed? Even though Neil ends up sacrificing himself, the fact that they're still alive at the end makes us think maybe things worked out the way they were supposed to. So, does Tenet set up a sequel? Well, it's up to Christopher Nolan. He could make a follow-up just like he could have done with Inception, but for now it's like a closed book, even though the ending hints that there could be more to explore. It's like Nolan is leaving the door open in case he wants to dive back into this world later on. Now, let's talk about what the ending of Tenet really means. On one level, it's a warning about the environment. If we don't change our ways, we're in big trouble. But beyond that, it's all about free will. The protagonist, asks if we really have the power to choose our own path. And while it seems like we do, there's this idea that maybe some things are just meant to happen, no matter our choices. Neil, another character, embodies this idea perfectly. He knows he's supposed to sacrifice himself, and even though he could walk away, he doesn't. It's like he's saying that sometimes destiny is more powerful than free will. Nolan's whole point here is to get us thinking. He wants us to question whether we control our lives, or if something bigger is at play. And by using time to explore these big ideas, he's showing us that maybe there's more to the universe than meets the eye. Have you watched Tenet so far? If so, let us know your thoughts on the ending, and hit the subscribe and like button before leaving. See you next time.